The Trap Set will always be available for free, but we rely on donations from our listeners. Please visit our website at thetrapset.net and click Donate. Subscribe to our show on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, give us a review.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you by Colectivo Coffee, handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com. This is Joe Wong. Welcome to The Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I'd like to play something for you. You're hearing Another One Rides the Bus by Weird Al Yankovic, featuring my guest, John Bermuda Schwartz, on percussion. And by percussion, I mean accordion case. Al met the drummer at Dr. Demento's studio, moments before this was recorded in 1980, and he asked him to bang along. The rest is history. As we'll discuss in the interview, no one, not even Al or Bermuda, could have predicted the success to come. Although the sound and stars of pop music have turned over many times in the past few decades, Al and his band have stayed current and created hit after hit. As Al's career developed, the sound of his tracks became more and more dialed in, virtually indistinguishable from the original songs. Bermuda and the band have proven themselves masterful at reverse engineering the sound and feel of everything from Michael Jackson to Nirvana to Lady Gaga. Much of the appeal of Al's music lies in his incredibly funny and clever lyrics, but the convincing recreations by the band provide the straight man to Al's comedy stylings. Weird Al and his musical collaborators are much more respected and relevant than ever before. In the past year, they won their 4th Grammy, and the album Mandatory Fun became their first #1 record. And to cap off their success, they're embarking on the Mandatory World Tour, the most expansive tour of their career. Now here's my interview with John Bermuda Schwartz. Tell me about how you were introduced to drums.
Drums came into the house when we lived in Chicago. My father was in advertising, and he did some kind of ad with the Ludwig Drum Company. I don't know what. I never asked my dad what it was. I never got a chance to ask the chief what it was. You know, they're gone forever. I have no idea what they did, but the payment was he was bartered a snare drum kit, a bag, a stand, a drum, sticks, brushes, a Haskell Haar record of rudiments, a practice pad, and my brother started taking drum lessons in Chicago. Well, my father added a bass drum and a tom to that snare kit and made a 3-piece kit out of it, hi-hat stand. And once we lived in Phoenix, my brother took up guitar, turned the drums over to me, and I started taking drum lessons. Ironically, prior to that, I was taking accordion lessons, and little did I know that I would someday wind up with a guy who was known for playing accordion.
Well, accordion was really big in the Midwest back then, right?
It was a very common thing for, you couldn't really always afford a keyboard, so it was a very common way to teach someone to play an instrument. You rented it. I mean, we didn't own the accordion.
Can you remember a specific moment when you had some sort of an epiphany behind the drum set, when it became your identity, or was it just a gradual process?
It's a gradual thing. I play drums, and I don't want to say my life is drums, but I mean, certainly my career is. I love playing drums. If I didn't play drums anymore, I'd go do something else. I mean, it's important to me, but I don't know if it was ever, if I ever became so one with the drum that it was some kind of a magical moment in my life. I mean, I decided very early on that I wanted to be a professional drummer, and not having any idea what that entailed or how to do it, or that there would be things someday like videos, or that going on the road was part of that, or that digital podcasts would someday be part of that future. It was just something I wanted to do.
Did you ever experience times of uneasiness when you came to that realization?
No, by the time I realized the whole career path thing,
right,
the lack of a career path, I was already in it. A lot of it is luck. It's right place, right time, and then you have to prove yourself. Being able to play is all well and good, but it doesn't amount to anything till you get your shot. Or when you get your chance, if you're not up to speed, you may never get that chance again. You may have one great audition in your life, and if you can't do it, if you can't rise to the occasion, then what good is that? What good is that bit of luck? So it's a combination of things. But I think only later on, after looking back, I realized, I just sort of got here without any particular method. I mean, yeah, every time I go in the studio with Al or go on the road, I have to prove myself. I have to keep up with him while he keeps up with world-class cutting-edge artists and producers out there. So we're always chasing them with the parodies and with the originals too. I mean, I wouldn't have got into electronics and programming and all that stuff had it not been for Al. I mean, probably not. I did that so that in 1985 I got my first drum machine. I already had a Simmons kit in 1984. I already knew that's where I needed to be. And I did that really so that some producer didn't do it instead. I wanted to do all the drumming, whether I pushed buttons or played the drums. And that's served me well. I think that's an important combination of talents.
So you program all the drums on the records if it's like the Chameleonaire thing or whatever?
Yep. It's all me and crossed over into what they call sound design now. It's not just, machines are passé. Actually, they're not. They're coming back, or
right.
Samples of machines are back. But, back in the day, it was a lot easier in the 80s. I knew a Lin from a DMX, from, et cetera, from a Roland, from a Yamaha, from an Akai. I knew all those machines because they made certain sounds and everybody used them. Well, as computerized, layered, filtered, tweaked, sounds came into being, where anything could become a kick or a snare, it wasn't that simple. And I had to start, I had to become a lot more creative in what I did. I had to become a lot more serious in the backwards engineering of these parts that I was being asked to copy. And I sort of developed a different approach to that. I didn't agonize so much about what they did, what the original producer or programmer did. I agonized more about how I could reproduce it. So it was a lot less important. It's like, how did they get that sound? It became more important, well, how do I get that sound?
Right.
And that,
so the underlying premise is that there's a few different ways to accomplish any particular sound.
Means to an end.
Right.
So it wasn't important that I knew what they did. It would help.
Right.
But I didn't bother myself too much with that. After a while, it's like, how would I make that sound? And, I get to the same place with a lot less agony about it.
How long does it normally take you to dial in sounds when you're doing a parody?
Well, back in the 80s, it was a lot simpler to dial in sounds because I knew what a lot of those sounds were. I did have some help from keyboard players that were a little more hip to certain sounds and the way things were starting to go. But as far as machines, let's say, I knew what machines they were. Now, it's more difficult to figure out how to recreate certain sounds because they're so wacky. they're so different. A snare is not really. It's not any one of 200 or 300 or 400 snare sounds. It could be anything. It could be part of a clap. It can be a snare sound with part of a rim click in it, blended. There's any number of things. I mean, I've spent 20, 30 hours on a song just getting sounds.
So eat it. Don't you tell me you're full, just eat it. Eat it. Get yourself an egg and beat it. Have some more chicken, have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried, just eat it. Just eat it.
Do you ever talk to the original producers or original drummers or programmers and ask them what they did?
Not prior to this album, not prior to Mandatory Fun. There was one song, and both the guitar player who was doing all the sound design and me doing all the drums did talk to the original guys. This was Imagine Dragons, who did Radioactive, and our parody was called Inactive. Well, I had there's a snare sound down there, and it's filtered, and there's a reverse thing, and there's a lot of distortion and bit crushing and all sorts of stuff going on. And between me and Jim, trying to find out a couple of things. I mean, in a pursuit of getting, not because we're lazy, but we really want to get it right. It's important to get some of those things righter than certain other things. And that song has very specific sounds. Now, the engineer helps us with a lot of that, but the basic sounds have to be there. So I talked to Daniel Platzman and was able to get the snare sample. And when I listened to it, it's like, mine would have worked in the track, but it was nothing like what they had. There were sweeps and filters and all sorts of great stuff going on. I never would have nailed that exactly. Well, Jim came along not too long later, wanted to ask a question or get something. He contacted the producer of the track and contracted Wayne Sermon from the group and didn't hear back. And so, I mean, we got one favor with those guys, and I got it. I got the snare. And that was important. It was important that that be right.
I'm waking up in Cheeto dust. My belly's covered with pizza crust. I'm using my inhaler now.
So that's the only time. That's the first and only time we've done that. I mean, Al's never done that. I've only met or talked to a couple of the other drummers we parodied on a couple of occasions, but usually after the fact.
Let's talk about how you got hooked up with Al in the first place. You had a relationship with Dr. Demento, right? You were involved with his show in some way?
Well, the Dr. Demento show, I was a fan of the show from the very early 70s, maybe 71 or something like that. And he ran a contest in 1973 for listeners who were so inclined to send in their version of a particular song that was a really popular song, Pico and Sepulveda. And I knew a bunch of horn players and stuff. And so I had a bunch of them come over and we did a recording of that. And Dr. Demento played it. In fact, because it was an instrumental, our version was instrumental, he used it as his theme for a while so he could talk over it in the intro of the show.
So this was in high school or in college?
I was in high school.
Okay.
So first in 1973. 1974, we did another song, sent that in. I graduated in 74. 1975, we sent in another song. And it's some of the same guys on all of these recordings. And Demento played that too. In fact, he still plays it on Halloween, a song called Mr. Ghost Goes to Town. Well, a couple of years later, I was invited to come down to the show and meet Dr. Demento and see the show. Came down there, and this was summer of 1980. So this was some years later. Came down there, and he asked if I'd like to come back at some point and be interviewed. I apparently was one of the first people to have homemade music played on his show. And I said, that'd be great. So we set up a date, and that date was September 14th, 1980, a Sunday night, and that was at KMET in Los Angeles. He did a live show. And Weird Al was there that night. Now, Weird Al was already well known on the show. I knew who he was. In fact, I think I already owned the My Bologna single that had come out the year before on Capitol. And I met Al that night. So I did my interview. And, I have a tape of it. I wasn't a very good interviewee at the time. I didn't have a whole lot to say, really. I was just talking about my groups at the time. And Al was going to do a song he had just written that weekend, live on the air. So he asked if I'd beat on his accordion case. There were other people in the studio answering phones, and just kind of the Demento crew. And they had little horns and whistles and clapped and sang, backing vocals. And it was a cover of a parody of Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, called Another One Rides the Bus. And so I beat on the accordion case for that, and kind of sang along and made noise and hooped and hollered. Anyway, Dr. Demento made a recording of that, which is a good thing he did, because that became a single later on. Anyway, we were wrapped up with that, and I said, Al, you should have a band. I'll be your drummer. And he said, okay. Not having any idea that there was any kind of future, or you never have any idea. It was something I just said. It was the right place, the right time. It was a lucky meeting. I would probably never have met him. I may not have ever met anyone else in my life. It was just one of those things that worked out. And that was just over 34 years ago, and still going strong.
Good instincts.
I guess so.
Well, when did you start to realize that being in the band with Al was actually like a viable career option? When did it feel like, hey, I could make a living doing this?
It was probably a few albums in. There was money there. I mean, it was probably more my expense situation that prevented me from being a full-time musician. And in fact, at the time, I worked for a company called Westwood One, which syndicated the Dr. Demento show. As far as when it became viable to really just be with him full-time, probably, about 8 or 10 years in. I mean, to making records and touring, probably 92 maybe, 93, 94, somewhere in there. It was obvious that this wasn't going to end anytime soon. There was enough money coming in, there was enough work, and that I could do that. And actually, within a couple of years, I had quit Westwood One and had been full-time with Al ever since.
So one thing that's really interesting to me is when you look back on the catalog of singles that you guys have made over the years and albums, you've outlasted the majority of the artists that you've parodied. To what do you attribute that kind of longevity?
Oh, boy. Well, Al's deal, as it were, is is satire. I mean, it's comedy. We're always doing whatever is current at the time, so we're always current. So unless people want to stop laughing, we're going to be there. And I think that's why it's lasted so long. I mean, we're not locked into a particular style or a sound. We're a fun band. There's not a philosophy, and there's not, the lyrics are not overly meaningful. It's fun. It's funny and it's fun.
Another thing that I find interesting is that Weird Al's cultural cachet has kind of grown over the years, and he's become more respected as an artist rather than just a novelty act.
Yeah.
I feel like back in the 80s when I was a kid, the albums that you guys were making were huge. And then, my generation grew up, and Al has been embraced by kind of like the new indie rock community, and you guys have played festivals like ATP in England.
Yep.
and
Bonnaroo,
yeah.
Bamboozle, yeah.
And it seems like not only has the commercial success continued, but cultural appreciation has gone up too. I mean, he's more part of the cultural landscape than ever.
Yeah, well, part of that is just sheer longevity. I mean, he's just always been there. Most of our fans, we stopped getting gold records before a lot of our fans were even born.
Right.
We'd already sort of run our course in big record sales. It's just, for a lot of them, Al's just always been there. He's ageless. Actually, he's not. He's 54. He'll be 55 next month. A lot, and you get respect for that. It's like Frank Sinatra, or Barbra Streisand, or
Yeah.
there's certain people that are just always there. You respect them. Neil Diamond, Jimmy Buffett. It's, if you're around long enough, you become an institution.
Mm-hmm.
You become sort of an icon. And the fact that Al is the only person really doing what he does at the level that he does it, that really puts him on a special pedestal. So there's a certain respect, and it wasn't always there. It was very goofy back in the 80s, and it was just the fact that another album came out and we actually had a hit off of it. It was always like, oh, Al's made a comeback.
Right.
And every album, a year later, it would be, oh, here's Al's comeback single, comeback album. And we just, you can't come back if you never go away.
Help me! I broke apart my insides. Help me! I've got no soul to sell. Help me! The only thing that works for me. Help me get away from myself. I wanna you like an animal. I wanna feel you from the inside. I wanna you like an animal. My whole existence is flawed. You get me closer to God. Hey!
Aside from what you do with Al, do you feel like you have a style of your own on the drums?
I don't have a style as much as I guess I have an approach to everything I play, and that's, somebody had written this, and I think it fits, is I play with economy and authority, meaning I try and play the right parts, and I know that's a very subjective thing, but for whatever style I'm doing, if anything, I tend to underplay a little bit, but it's, the right part is not far from there. It's not 50% more than underplaying. It's a little bit more. And there's, good musicians, not drummer, but a good musician knows where that is. And a good drummer knows how to play it. So, I have kind of two mantras, and one of them is WWRD, what would Ringo do?
Uh-huh.
And the other is WWHD, what would Hal do?
Uh-huh.
Hal Blaine.
Yeah.
And Hal was the master at doing exactly the right parts, and never overplayed. Doesn't seem like he ever could have done more. It was always exactly right. And those guys, for all the stuff I do, I can source a lot of fills and a lot of feels and a lot of approaches and a lot of breaks. Probably 90% of what I do can be sourced from something they were. And between Hal and Ringo and Charlie Watts and Jim Keltner and a lot of the guys that really just played the right thing on a lot of commercial songs, those are my idols as far as my approach. So when I say economy, it's economy in the way those guys do it. And with authority, it's kind of the way, it's a feel, it's a timing, it's the way I hit the drums. and that's, so I can be playing something very simple and sound like I'm just beating the hell out of the drums and creating a lot of energy, even though to write it out on paper, it looks very simple.
How did you develop that? Is that something that you still work on? How did you create that sound?
I don't think it was a conscious thing. I just, at some point, probably back in the 80s, probably with Al, as we toured more, started playing bigger venues, started spending more time behind the drums on a more regular basis, I think I just started putting more energy into it and started, rather than just wailing on them, started to learn to control that energy.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have kids?
No kids. That was actually a conscious decision. My wife and I have been married coming up on 24 years, and she was working full time. I was actually working full time, and then taking time off for tours. We didn't think that kids fit into our plan, and she's retired now, retired young, and I work with Al 3-4 months out of most years, and we certainly have more time for that now. We're a little further down as far as years go, but no regrets. We except that I'm not sure who's going to get all my drums. Maybe my nephews.
You can give them to me.
Yeah, and you.
Are you a huge drum collector?
Yeah, I've got a lot of drums.
Do you have a warehouse full of drums?
Not a warehouse yet. I wish I did, because I'm out of room, which may be good because that prevents me from getting things that I'd like to get. Cymbals don't take up a lot of room.
Right.
So I have quite a few cymbals. My cymbal collection is well known among other collectors and among the online forums. I have as of today I have 805 cymbals, which is a healthy collection.
Yeah. Or unhealthy, depending on how you look at it.
Or unhealthy. I mean, it's a good retirement. That's my retirement. It's funny because I have my cymbal bag I take around town. There's a pair of hi-hats, an 18-inch and a 15-inch cymbal in that. And those are the cymbals I use in town on almost every gig. On the road, it's a different story. But I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cymbals that I've never played and never will play. But they're just there. They're there just in case. And that's another thing with getting sounds on certain things. A lot of those cymbals I have sampled already. I will source those cymbals, and
so you'll play a sample of your cymbal rather than actually play the cymbal.
Well, if it's in the course of, say, a dance track, a lot of times I'll and a lot of times it'll be like, well, I know that cymbal sounds like that. I've got one that sounds like that. If only it was sped up and then truncated a little, and with a little bit of filtering on it, it will sound like that other kind of sampled cymbal, sampled tweak thing. I can do the same thing with a live acoustic cymbal. Collecting for me is partly it's about collecting. I mean, I've got stuff that I'll never play that's really cool to have, and I've got other stuff that are players' drums that aren't necessarily collectible, but that's all part of the arsenal. I've got 89 snares, a couple more coming next month. Do I need 89? No. How many do I really use? A dozen, maybe. Really, in reality, 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. I could get rid of 20 snares, not miss them, and still have way too many snares.
Are there any other stories that you'd like to share that you haven't shared with anybody else about touring with Weird Al?
There's nothing terribly remarkable or interesting. I mean, we tour. We're band has a bus, the crew has a bus, the rest of the stuff goes in a semi. We carry merch. It's. I don't think there's anything.
It seems like a well-oiled machine, and I wonder if there was ever a time when it was crazier or more hedonistic or wild when you were younger, or if it was always pretty well-focused and always pretty professional.
Well, it was as professional as we were at the time. I mean, it was always state-of-the-art. For example, we've always run videos of one sort or another. Now, when I say video, I mean in the very early days, we had a 16-millimeter projector, an Elco projector, or an Elmo, or whatever it was, and literally, used that to play our single at the time, to play Ricky, because we couldn't play Ricky. We didn't have the female vocalist. We actually did a couple of gigs where I tried to sing kind of the I Love Lucy part, and it's just that wasn't working. So but we had to represent.
Can you
get
your voice up that high?
No, not anymore. It wasn't as high as it was squeaky, and I as far as anything wacky or nobody's
doing coke off of a stripper backstage at a Weird Al show.
No. You know what? We don't have nobody's got any of those kind of vices. Nobody had them even when we were young. I mean, there was never anything. It's not that kind of band, and we don't have that kind of audience.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't seem like it, but I always wonder if there's some hidden dark side.
We'd have to, if we wanted any action, we would have to go well outside of the Weird Al, part of the tour and go find a club somewhere. And I mean, that's not to say, when we were younger,
right,
and when our audience was more of a college crowd, we were a lot closer in age to the audience at the time. So the potential for groupies was there. Again, we're not that kind of band. We didn't attract those kind of people.
Right.
The kind of people that were attracted to rock stars didn't find that in us.
Right.
We weren't doing that. Eventually, our audiences got younger. And then eventually...
Seems multi-generational
now. Well, they grew up, and then we kept getting younger. So we've got 4-year-olds in the audience and 64-year-olds in the audience. It was mostly a male audience in the beginning. Now it's very evenly split. It's a very wide demo. Now, now that we're in our 50s and above, the potential for groupies is way reduced. And again, we're still not
that doesn't stop some people.
Well, we're not that kind of band, and it's still not that kind of crowd. But if we were of that mind, this is like the wrong band to, we're in the wrong business and the wrong, we missed our opportunity for that. So no, nothing scandalous ever happened. Nothing. It's just, Al mentioned that in the Behind the Music for MTV years ago. And
they were looking for some dirt, and there wasn't
any. I mean, there really seriously wasn't any. There's not any. I mean,
and it seems like there's a real mutual respect between all the members of the band too.
There is. I mean, there's and it's like a family. I don't want to say we all get along great. Some of us get along with each other better than others, and depending on the time and depending sometimes how long we've been on the road.
Right.
I mean, we start out.
The longer you go on the road, the more
it gets
less
ugly.
Patience you have with everybody else.
It gets very ugly, and just because you get a certain amount of cabin fever, and sometimes you need a break. And again, over the years, we've had those kind of breaks. We did a tour in 2007 that was 5 months without a break. I mean, really, it was 22 weeks and no break. Not, here's 4 days off. I mean, we might have had 1 or 2 3-day, things where we weren't playing. Of course, then we were traveling. So now we're stuck on a bus with each other. And it got about 3-4 months in, knowing that we still had time to go. It got a little ugly, because then there's a point you get to where you see the light at the end of the tunnel. After 3 months, it's like, great, we only have, another 2 weeks. Well, after 3 months, it's like, we got 2 more months of this. And it was getting a little testy. But there is a respect there. We know each other very well. I don't want to say we're dysfunctional. We're very functional. And we know if someone's in a bad mood to not push it. And now that we're all a lot more mature, although now we're starting to head into the curmudgeon phase. Right. The old man phase, kids get off my lawn phase.
Can you see yourself doing this in another 20 years?
20? No, probably not. If I'm lucky, I'll be dead.
If you're lucky, you'll be dead?
Yeah, I don't.
That's dark.
I don't want. Well, no, I don't want to be dead in 20 years. Okay. I don't think I want to tour this way. I mean, there are guys in their 70s who go out and tour.
Yeah.
Who are road dogs. I don't know if I really want to do that. I still want to play drums. I don't know if I want to do it 5 nights a week. For 3 months.
I think most people would have never guessed that you would be so successful in 2014 back in 1984. Right?
We wouldn't have guessed this in 2011.
Yeah.
Because we never know. It's album to album. It's like, are we going to have another hit ever? Are people going to want to listen to us again? And every album we put out, the answer is yes. But in 20 years, maybe he'll do a stand-up in Vegas. He'll just be there. There'll be an orchestra behind him. And may or may not include us. I mean, I'd like to do it as long as he wants to do it. And he wants to do it as long as the fans will let him do it.
Well, I have to say, I've seen you play with Al at least twice, actually exactly twice, and it's just so much fun. I'm so glad that you were here today, and thank you so much for being here, Bermuda.
Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set. And visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Contact us at thetrapset@gmail.com.